really what's happening is the problem is they're hiring a driver before they've built the car. We see this happen now, right? Where if you're sort of, if you've gone from 0 to 1 on referrals and the kind of the quality of your work, that's great. I'm not knocking that. I think that's awesome to build a business that way. But the problem is you haven't really built the infrastructure whereby somebody else can slot into your seat and close that deal, because there's just lots of intangibles that person doesn't have yet. And also there's not really a good, machine for getting them appointments teed up and getting them opportunity.
He knows what he's talking about when it comes to landing your dream client, to growing your digital agency or whatever type of agency you have. And he really knows what he's talking about when it comes to business sales and lead generation. And this, of course, is my favorite topic because I always love learning something new and how you can get your message out there. And there's a bunch of things that we're covering. Of course, the main thing is really lead generation and some unique ways of getting new leads that aren't just related to paid media or related to just your actual marketing, but actual strategies of going out there and getting new business and forming those relationships. We're talking about all of that, and it's so good. And Dan's just a super genius. He might not call himself that, but I can tell you after listening to this episode, you'll say, yeah, he's pretty much a genius. So you're going to enjoy this.
Dan, welcome to the show. I am beyond thrilled to have you with me today because we're talking about my favorite topic. And I know it's those who are listening, I know it's their favorite topic too, because we're going to talk about the things, probably the big pain points that people have in their business, which is generating more sales, generating more leads. How do we land our dream clients? How can we actually build effective sales teams? And you're like the genius on all of those topics. So I'm so excited that you're with me today. Welcome.
Thank you. I don't know about genius, but I do know how to nerd out on various sales tech platforms and stuff and so on. So hopefully I'll be useful in some way.
That alone is genius. So in what you do. Yes. So before we get into all of that, let's talk about a little bit of your background and how you got into what you're doing today.
Yeah, for sure. So basically, I moved to New York out of college in like 2010. And I think I always joke that if you don't know what you want to do in New York, you kind of just end up in like the waste bin of the agency world. So I started, I started like on the account side, kind of like working on some consumer accounts. Like I was literally the guy that like answered problems about broken or counterfeit headphones on a Facebook wall for like a consumer electronics brand, and did that for a little while, pitched a lot of things, and then basically moved on to being the head of new business and, the first employee basically at an animation studio called Idea Rocket that I think, we both know.
Yes.
And helped them do pretty well. Basically was kind of in one of these classic, agency/creative services, kind of like sales, client service hybrid roles. So I was always like shuffling back and forth between, onboarding clients and then trying to win new business and that sort of thing. And, really kind of like early on, didn't really take ownership over being in sales. It was kind of like something I had to do. And then eventually, my boss, who's still a good friend, was like, do you want to get sales coaching? And I was like, yeah, I probably should. I maybe can make more money that way. It's probably a good idea. So did that. And, we tried every tactic under the sun. We did in AdWords, we did outbound, we did inbound, and eventually got on, thousands of calls, got a lot of reps in, and helped the company grow. Eventually got them, not just me, but helped them get to 7 figures and a bunch of Fortune 500 clients. And then around 2014, just kind of wanted to do my own thing, and kind of did the whole Tim Ferriss route, and quit the job, traveled Asia for a while, and ended up starting Sales Schema.
4-hour work week.
yeah, that's what it was at the time. And that's thinking on it's evolved a lot. Now it's definitely not a 4-hour work week, but it's still not too bad. But yeah, started Sales Schema in like 2014. And, pretty soon on, we realized that, agencies were a place where we could really be useful. That's where I had a lot of experience. And most of our clients kind of got from 0 to 1 on referrals and personal networks and got to a place where that wasn't enough anymore. And then, we sort of pivoted the business to doing outreach and being, essentially a fractional new business team focused on the agency side of things. So what that means is, we're typically going out to the market for our clients, doing outreach to keep the pipeline full and get meetings regardless of how busy or not busy they are.
Well, that's so awesome, because that's a big thing for people that have, some type of a service business or an agency, is how do you keep that pipeline full? And when it comes to, like you're talking about Google ads before, or running paid media ads, it's a tricky thing. And it can work great for a few months, and all of a sudden there's an algorithm change and it's like, I don't know what to do. How do I keep my pipeline full? So let's talk about that first.
Right. Yeah. So basically, I think that there's lots of different channels and, approaches that can have different levels of effectiveness for different people. If you're selling to roofers or something, then you're probably going to have a different process than if you sell to Fortune 500 corporations.
Right.
My experience in Sales Schema has been more towards the latter. So it's definitely outreach or outbound focus, and that tends to be a good fit. Not only, but I think that there's more of an emphasis on a situation where, your pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is big enough to justify making that connection, maintaining that sales process, and so on and so forth from there. So I'd say, as a rough range, most of our clients, their average deal size is probably $80K up to 8 figures or something like that. So
right.
That's kind of what we tend to see. So I can definitely talk a lot about outreach. I think, for us personally, and for a lot of the internal stuff that we do, just like we're doing right now, I'm a big believer in earned and, having a podcast, getting on other people's podcasts. I think that it's a relatively low effort thing to do. And it's a great way to build an audience, but I don't think it's the only way. So I can from this point nerd out in 5 different pathways, I think, depending on what you think would be most useful.
Well, let's see. So, you're talking about Outbound. What are some strategies that you use that have yielded really good results?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's evolved a little bit, so I think in the early days, not the early days, but, even as of a year or two ago, you really could do outbound in a way where you're like, okay, whatever, I want to reach CMOs of SaaS companies. I'm just making this up. And I'm going to spit out a list of them and, write them a pitch, and then I'm going to get a bunch of calls from it. And I'm not saying that never works. I think for kind of new or really interesting kind of novel services, that direct approach can still be pretty effective. But I think what we've seen happen is kind of 2 big trends. The first is that there's just way more competition, overall, for agency services, creative services, especially, and so that's the first thing. The second trend is just competition for attention. And then that trend accelerated, massively, like everything did with COVID and the whole world going digital, where everybody that was at a trade show or, was trading business through analog means is now had to figure it out through digital. So that means that there's this traffic jam effect. And it if I say it, if you go on LinkedIn right now, check your inbox, it's just constant noise.
I can't even do it. It's unless somebody's actually giving something of value, but honestly, people are just, it's so bombarded with emails that are just, hey, are you interested? Are you interested? Are you interested? And they're all kind of offering the same thing.
Right. Exactly. So it's become, and because of the noise is drowning out even those that are well positioned and tasteful and so on. So then the question becomes, Dan, I'm sort of getting away from your question. Okay, Dan, what the heck do you actually do then? And what we found to work, and kind of where we've shifted our campaigns, is what we call, relationship driven new business at scale, and kind of emphasis at scale. So a lot of what we do at Sales Schema is kind of writing the sorts of emails and doing the sort of targeting that, our clients could do if they actually had 1 million hours in the day to sit down and do custom research on each prospect and write them, a custom letter and so on. So to get tangible, and this is through, a lot of proprietary technology we've built and so on, we might have a situation we have a campaign going now where we've identified C-level, and or marketing leaders that went to the same college as our client. And we're saying, hey, saw you went to, University of Michigan. I'm a fellow alum. We're an agency. We do this, that, and the third. Thought I'd reach out with a fellow Wolverine. I forget what the mascot is. Let's connect. And then from that, when somebody gets that message, they're thinking, okay, yeah, this was somebody actually took the time to do this. I'll give them, some time in my day. And even when they're not ready to talk, they're at least not saying go away. They're at least not hitting the spam button. So that's where things are heading. And we have another, couple dozen campaigns that we're running now with similarly like creative ways in. So I think that, even if you can't do what we do at scale, if you're doing this on your own, it's about thinking more creatively, and kind of getting more towards personalization instead of just doing what everybody else is doing and like figuring out, okay, let me just, churn out a list of the ultimate person I want to talk to. Think more about like who's likely to talk to you in the sort of account you'd like to be doing business, as opposed to just that ultimate decision maker that's probably getting just inundated all day.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I think that for the past, I don't know how many years, we've had so much technology that helps us in terms of sales and streamlining things. There's so many CRMs that automate things for you that really have allowed us to reach more people and keep them nurtured via automation. At the same time, people are seeing so much of that automation and they're like, this is probably an email they just sent to everybody, or this is, just a template and it's not personalized. And I know that you can speak to this in terms of what is that balance of automating and then also being very custom, like what are the right times to be custom? What are the right times to automate? Because I think people get kind of overwhelmed with both.
Yeah, it's such a good question. So I think that before somebody has agreed to speak to you, before you have any sort of relationship, that's a better time to automate, and I think that there's a lot less to be lost than people think. Granted, like there's ways that you can mess things up or be distasteful, but I think usually in my experience, people's the opportunity cost is more than not shipping and not keeping up with a certain volume of outreach or whatever. And this doesn't just apply to outbound. It could apply to any marketing effort for that matter. I think a lot of the times people use that as an excuse not to actually build a relationship in their market. And then they think that something bad's going to happen, like I'm going to offend somebody or something like that. And usually what happens is you don't matter that much. Like if the timing's not right or you're not interesting enough, people promptly forget about you and then you can re-engage them later. It's very rare. Unless you do something that's really crazy, you're not going to be offending people and stuff. So I think that's where automation can come in handy a little bit more, is being able to keep up with a certain volume of outreach so that you can actually play this numbers game while not only playing a numbers game. So again, getting towards personalization, it might mean, for context, we're probably contacting an average of about 100 people per business day, which, sounds like a lot, but really isn't that many, but it's enough for us to be getting a meaningful number of meetings in a week, i.e., probably 5 to 20. So again, I think before that relationship happens, it's, you should be more open to a little bit more automation. After that, though, I think that's people tend to get this in reverse. And then, once they have a relationship, once they've already gotten on a call with somebody, then that's often where they are like, well, let me automate the follow-up or something like that. I think there's different ways to think about this. I think that, if you're sending a newsletter, I'm sort of the new way of doing it where you're not fooling anybody into thinking that a newsletter is anything but that. Like everybody that gets your newsletter, I'm a big believer, they should think that this was meant for one to many. But when you're doing that kind of bespoke follow-up, with somebody, maybe it was like whatever, a CMO you talked to 60 days ago, it's not going to be worth too much automation there. You might have like a mail merge. You might have like 50 people and you have a filter in your CRM that says, okay, here's 50 people that I talked to, between 30 and 90 days ago. I might have like a paragraph that I'm reusing, but I'm going to at least customize that first line. That's the right way to think about it, where it's kind of like hybrid automation. So that's kind of, and then beyond that, once people are going through, a deeper part of your funnel, maybe they're about to sign up for a $50,000 project or something, then that's where you really don't want much automation at all, because there's just too much to be lost. So that's kind of how I like to think about it.
As you're talking about sending out 100 emails per day, and actually, I think you said 5 to 10 appointments. That's really good, actually, out of 100. So I'm guessing you've got some really good really good content that you're sending, really good, emails that are actually opening doors for people to say, oh, there's some value here. And I know you talked a little bit about that before, but what are some other things that people can do to create that, so that they see something in that first email? Because like, we said earlier, people are receiving so many cold reach outs and they don't know the person, so they have no reason to open it. Like, what are some things that can get people like, oh, I should pay attention to this?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think there's lots of things you can do. So I think what we've seen work is probably not the only way. I've heard a lot of people having a lot of success with like personalized videos and stuff. That's not something that we've done a lot of yet, but I know that people have a lot of good things to say about that. For us, I think like one way to think about it is the work is always going to live at some part of the process. It's just sort of figuring out like where just having the right expectations about where that work lives. So, for example, I think that the way that we do things at Sales Schema, less of the work is centered on positioning and coming up with case studies and sending that sort of like funnel-based work to people. But so the actual content we're sending is actually pretty simple. It's textual. The hard thing is the data, right? Is finding that commonality and finding the personal and or business connection that our clients have with the prospect that we're reaching out to. So I think with that in mind, if people wanted to kind of ape what we're doing, that's the better starting place is placing that work on that prospect identification. So again, instead of just like going to like a sales navigator or a Zoom info and figuring out that CMO, it might be that you're part of a trade association and you figure out, okay, what companies that have sponsored our trade association in the past could be a good fit. And then you're kind of bespoke coming up with that list and saying, hey, I'm part of Acme Trade Association and saw you were a sponsor 2 years ago. Thought this would be a good reason to connect, and using that as a way in or something to that effect. It could be an alumni connection. It could be a million other things, but being able to put the work towards that research, I think is a really, really great way in. And that's something that's been effective for us.
Yeah, I totally agree.
If you're listening to this podcast, I'm guessing you fall into one of these categories. You're an entrepreneur, a small business owner, an online marketer, or maybe an agency owner. I'm also guessing that you want new leads who are excited to buy from you. Am I right? Would you be excited to generate 5 new leads a day? 10? 100? Maybe even hundreds? Do you even know where to begin to do that? Well, I can tell you this, it doesn't begin with wishing and waiting, but it does begin with a successful lead funnel. If you want to have an endless stream of hot leads coming into your pipeline, you'll want to check out the 5-day lead challenge, where you'll learn step by step the high-level strategy to generate leads on demand for your specific business. You'll learn how to build your lead magnet that attracts these leads to you in the coolest way I've seen yet. You'll also learn how to take these people and then turn them into your dream leads. You'll also learn how to follow up with them and how to launch this funnel without having to spend any money. Sounds pretty cool, right? Can I make it even cooler? Okay, here it goes. It's all free. All free. Yes, you can learn all of this for free. So if you're ready to get access to this free 5-day challenge, head over to thedrawshop.com/5day. thedrawshop.com/5 and day. See you there.
Now, in terms of finding those people, going beyond just referrals or, who's in your LinkedIn network, what are other ways to find those key dream clients that you want to connect with?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think first is just kind of getting clarity and focus around what makes for a dream client. I think a lot of the times that's the hardest part, especially when we're working with agencies that have worked in all sorts of different industries all over the place. So I think it's first kind of figuring out like where you've been successful and so on in the past. From there, another thing, just to give out another tactic that you can do, and this, again, it's almost limitless kind of how you can go about finding this data. But one is looking at kind of historic client accounts. So this works particularly well if you've worked with big companies before. Okay. Figuring out, okay, who used to work at that company that's since moved on to another place, and then using that as the way in and saying, hey, we've done a lot of work with Nike in the past. Saw you used to work there, and now you're at Reebok. Curious what you're up to now. We've done this, that, and the third, and that's a really just kind of like classy way in. And if you think about it, not very few, if any, people are doing that. So I think it is tough without like a lot of the proprietary stuff we're doing. Doing it at scale is going to be tough to do right away. But I think even if you were to put some time towards that, or even delegate it to somebody else on your team, that's a good way to think about it. And I think LinkedIn will get you some of the way there. And there's probably other resources too. But a lot of what we're doing is based on around 15 list builders, drawing from lots of different wells all the time. So it's hard to DIY a lot of it. But I think that even if you just did, kind of an elementary version of it, you can get pretty far.
That's really awesome. And I think it really opens up ways that you can really connect with your dream client. So now let's talk about, actual sales. And I think for a lot of agencies are smaller. Some people that are listening are just starting out with their agency. They might have worked for somebody before, maybe they're a freelancer, but they're just starting to build that. And so they might only have, they are either their own salesperson or they have a couple of salespeople. How can what are some tips for really building an effective sales team, especially when you're selling services that are high ticket ongoing services?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think there's probably a lot of different ways to get it right. I think that there's a few kind of like culprits for getting it wrong that we tend to see. So I often like to start there. I think the biggest thing to avoid is just make sure you're not kind of hiring that closer prematurely. And we see this happen a lot where an agency says, I'm not really a salesperson. I don't like sales. I want to get it off my plate, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll interview a bunch of people. They'll end up hiring probably somebody who's really good in the 6-figure realm. And then 3, 6, 9 months later, that person hasn't produced much, and then they're let go. And they say, well, that didn't work. And then maybe they give that another shot later. It doesn't work again. And then they're like, I guess nobody else can sell but me. But what's happening is the problem is they're hiring a driver before they've built the car. We see this happen. Right. Where if you're sort of, you've gone from 0 to 1 on referrals and the kind of the quality of your work, that's great. I'm not knocking that. I think that's awesome to build a business that way. But the problem is you haven't really built the infrastructure whereby somebody else can slot into your seat and close that deal, because there's just lots of intangibles that person doesn't have yet. And also there's not really a good, machine for getting them appointments teed up and getting them opportunity. Great salespeople, thrive based on division of duties, and I think in a traditional perfect sales world, you'd have that closer, you'd have a BDR or business development rep, like a junior sitting below them that's teeing up meetings. And then that BDR would be fueled by data and copy and everything. And not to shamelessly plug us, but we're looking to kind of be a better, faster, cheaper than that agency BDR. But anyway, regardless of that, I think the thing to do is just kind of like, it's what a lot of people don't want to hear, but just kind of like accept the fact that as the owner, you might be that best closer for maybe a while, until you're able to kind of build that machine and that system.
Yes.
I think there's exceptions to that. Like when I was in, an Idea Rocket, our owner did not want to be involved in sales, but he also invested tons in AdWords and getting inbound working really well, so that he was able to kind of slot somebody else into that role and, make that work. So I think that once you're kind of able to build that car, then you can get a closer in there. So then the question becomes, okay, like what, how do you build that sort of like underlying system? And I think that realistically, it's going to be a combination of an owner working on it. And then if it's just, you just starting out, it's probably you, and then delegating certain tasks and that sort of thing to build that machine.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I love that analogy too. It really does make sense. What are the things that that Sales Schema is like? What are all the things that you can do to help agencies build?
Yeah, for sure. So basically, our core competency is being fractional new business team, which is a fancy way of saying like we're looking to slot into kind of that junior level sales role. So what we're really, really good at is kind of like helping our clients get clarity, kind of figuring out, okay, out of the whole grab bag of potential verticals and so on they can work with. What do we think is going to be effective? And then from there, we're actually like going out, building those lists and doing that outreach to get meetings teed up. So, when we're actually doing it, we're doing it as our client or as whoever the salesperson we're assigned is. So our whole, core competency is pipeline, is, building top of funnel and that sort of thing. In addition to that, we also, we do kind of informal consulting and coaching sometimes. We have a course called the Agency Lead Generation course. If anybody's interested in that, it's just salesschema.com/course launch. So that might be useful. But anyway,
sales, let me just say that again, salesschema.com/
course launch.
Course launch. Okay. We'll make sure to have that in our show notes.
Yeah. So hopefully that'll be useful to some people. But yeah, that's kind of what the way that we're thinking about it. And I think that, a lot of the times our clients are thinking about positioning and kind of like where best to focus, especially now where there's so much, so much chaos and so on. And our thinking, whether people hire us or not, is that the best way to figure it out is to actually go to your market, try to sell people things. Because that's going to tell you a lot more than just kind of like guessing at it or reading articles or whatever. So
you are an awesome solution for agency owners. And I'm excited about your course too. I'm going to look at that. So you also have a podcast, correct?
Yeah, we have a podcast called the Digital Agency Growth Podcast, and we have a lot of different people on it. I've been kind of going off the reservation lately and having people from the tech world and so on. So it's a lot of fun.
I love it. I love all that you're doing because I think it's something that you have to constantly be educating yourself on and adapting to, especially when you're in this type of a business that you're selling services. It's challenging. It's really challenging, especially when you're in that higher, ticket range. It's harder to, or it appears to be harder to close when it's not just a little widget that you're selling.
Yeah, absolutely. It's challenging. I think that's the tough part is like a lot of the times, of course, sales cycles are longer and so on. I think that the upside is, you don't have to necessarily be everywhere. You don't have to, I think that there's a lot more to be said for like simplification.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to outbound, and I can get into that. But yeah, I think we're big believers in the idea of, outbound is probably something that should be part of everybody's arsenal, if they're in the big ticket world. And then from there, you might have one or two other channels, and for most of our clients, that's enough to make this work. So
yeah,
at least up to certain points. Yeah.
Let's actually, we talked about it a little bit earlier before, but let's actually clarify just for those that might be totally new to, any type of marketing and have really just gone based on referrals, the difference between inbound and outbound.
Yeah, it's a great question. So outbound is basically, you going outside proactively to build relationships and so on. So it's knocking on doors, so to speak, and hopefully a way that's tasteful and so on from there. And then versus inbound, which is, it might be putting up ads, it might be putting content out to the world, going on people's shows and, earn the media like I'm doing right now, and that sort of thing in order to get people coming to you. So they're both great. They both have their own unique pros and cons or challenges and so on. I think for outbound, to go in with the right expectations, the challenge is that you're typically going to get in at an earlier stage, and it's going to take a little bit longer to close. In that, when you knock on somebody's door, they might take a call with you because they're interested and curious in what you're up to, but you're never just going to will a project into existence. You're not just going to be able to convince somebody to, build a 6-figure website or whatever it is that you're doing, with some exceptions. And those exceptions are, you might get lucky occasionally and you happen to get in with somebody at the right time. So that's the challenge. I think the advantage though is that it scales to the size of your whole market, and you get to decide you go after, and also you get to get in earlier. So the challenge is also an advantage because you get to guide the decision-making process and determine, how those decisions are made. Inbound's great because, people are coming to you. They're going to come with a higher level of trust because, they found you, and maybe there's thought leadership that you've put out and so on. So you're going to be more of a shoe-in. The downside is that it can take longer to kind of build up that infrastructure and get it to a place where it's actually producing inbound leads. And also, by the time they reach out to you, they might be solution aware. So they might sort of be like, okay, I know generally what I want. I'm going to talk to 4 different vendors and, pin them against each other and see who gives me the best rate and all that sort of thing, as opposed to getting to guide the whole decision earlier on. So they're both, they're both things you have to do both of them basically.
Yeah.
Both mandatory in some ways. So it's just sort of knowing what to expect.
And inbound, is probably more of people know that they have a problem and they're looking to you to help solve them. Whereas outbound, you're introducing them, or they might not even be aware that they have that as an issue. And you're kind of, that's why the sales cycle is longer too, because you're making them aware, like, hey, you might not know this, but don't worry, we can help.
Right, exactly. And that's one of the biggest expectations we like to be like super clear on with clients is this is not going to be like a referral, because a lot of the times what we see is kind of like an overinflated sense of sales skills. And I don't mean that to beat anybody up, but it's just a reality where we probably average 3 times a week, I hear, get us in the room and we'll close the deal. And it's like, well, yeah, when somebody has been referred to you, they know generally what you want, you've come vetted, and that's great. It's great that you're getting in those rooms, but that's tough to scale. And, you're going to have to hear more no's than you're used to in order to make outbound work, but it scales, and you get to decide who you talk to ultimately. So that's kind of our approach to it.
And that's really huge to understand, because the next question I was going to ask you about is like the difference in terms of a salesperson, that's on your team, and people will say, oh, I'm so good at sales. I'm so good at sales. And it's like, well, if you've got somebody coming to you wanting what you have, it's in my opinion, a different skill level to close that person than it is to go out and convince somebody that they need something that they might not have been thinking about. And I'd love to talk about the difference in, if we're looking at 2 different types of salespeople, those that are like, I'm a great closer. Well, every lead is coming to you, versus the reaching out and closing deals.
Yeah. So I think that reaching out, it requires you to actually like take on sales as a discipline and as an undertaking in a way that you might not have had to before. So I think that with referrals, it's not very rare. It's pretty uncommon for us to actually talk to agency owners and other salespeople that have actually gone through like formal sales training or have had to sort of like button up a process based on feedback that they're getting on lots of different calls. It's usually, hey, we might get a pitch that comes to us through referral, a couple times a month or whatever. And we have, we take out the old dusty proposal and we figure out what they want, and then we pitch them, and then we win, maybe out of every 1 or 2 times or so. And it's a big project, and that's great. I'm not, if that's working for you, do it till the end of time. But when you're talking about outbound, it really requires you to kind of become like an athlete. You're becoming this performance athlete when it comes to sales, and that you're going through the process. You have a system, and it's something that where things happen at certain times for a reason. And to get tangible, for our process, we have kind of an initial qualification call with people that we talk to. We set expectations at the beginning. Here's what here's what we need to learn. Here's what's going to happen on this call. Don't get mad at us if we don't give you the information you want. We got to figure out if it makes sense to schedule a follow-up call. Here's what's going to happen on that follow-up call. And then in the proposal, we're going through the motions and saying, here's what's going to happen when. We're going to have another call after that. So it all becomes something that is very deliberate and very orchestrated. And I think that, that's something that you're not just going to be able to make up out of thin air without having done it. It's going to take battle testing it and going through reps, basically, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely makes sense. Is this some of the stuff that you teach in your course, by the way?
So the course is basically built on the top of the funnel. So for getting agreement to that appointment.
Okay.
So in the future, maybe we will make a sales course, but right now it's basically just focused on the lead component. Yeah.
Yeah, which is awesome. I'm all about that. This is so great. I think, one of the biggest takeaways for those listening is having both in effect, your inbound sales operations as well as your outbound, and also remembering, like you can't have the driver before the car is built. It's so great. I can, of course, we're an animation company, so I can totally see that drawn out.
Exactly. Yeah.
But what are three things for, an agency right now? What are like three takeaways that you could offer someone listening right now that would be, the most important things to focus on?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually thought about this and got it down to a very cheesy 3 C's that I'm probably stealing.
I love cheesy.
Yeah. So it's 3 C's that I know I'm stealing from somebody because it's just too obvious. But the first is clarity, consistency, creativity, right? So I think the first is clarity around just what makes for a good client. And it doesn't mean that I've sort of broad framed how I think about this. I don't think it has to be niching down, but it probably means, starting with that ideal client that really well, that you can close, as opposed to what we tend to see a lot, which is like day trading, where it's like, what's hot right now? We just had a great new project and cannabis, so let's go after that. Figuring out historically kind of where you can be most useful within a market. So kind of getting clear on who you're going after. I think the second thing is consistency, in that instead of thinking about this in terms of like tactics and software and all that sort of stuff, think about it more as in, okay, who's doing this? How many hours can they devote? Let's make sure that those hours are devoted to this process at these times each day or each week, in terms of prospecting and getting new business and that sort of thing. And then making sure that, there's those consistent practices. And if that means you're hiring somebody to do it, great. If you're not there yet, then maybe that's you or, somebody else on your team. And then the third thing is creativity. And this is something I've been thinking a lot more about lately, in that I think there's when agencies work with their clients, they invest so much creative energy in doing really cool, like out of the box things. But then when it comes to doing sales for themselves, there's a lot of tendency to look for like a template and look for like a step-by-step instructional. When in reality, I think that if a lot more agencies just let themselves loose a little bit on their own efforts, they would do a lot better. So I would sort of like, have fun with it. Most of our clients have fun with their clients coming up with things. Like, don't be afraid to do that for yourself and, do things that are different than, annoying gurus like me are telling you to do. And that'll probably get you, a lot more interest than almost anything else. So.
Those are so great. I love that. My favorite is always clarity. I mean, all of them are so good, but when you have clarity, it's just the best feeling in the world. You can take off from there.
Yeah, everything, the stress melts away, right? So.
Yep, exactly.
Yep.
Oh, this was so good. Dan, thank you so much. Again, check out everything that you guys do at salesschema.com, SalesSchema.com. And then it was salesschema.com /course launch if you want to check out that course. Any final words, Dan?
No, I think that's it. But I really appreciate it, Summer. And hopefully we'll get you on our show at some point before long.
I would love it. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Hey guys, I just want to say thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already done so, would you do me a favor and go subscribe and review this podcast? My goal is to continue to deliver you content that will really move the revenue needle in your business and give you up-to-date content on anything else that can dramatically help your business. You can also find us at thedrawshop.com/podcast, where you can comment on the podcast or contact us directly with any issues you'd like me to address. Thanks again. I really, really appreciate you listening, and I'll see you next time.